This is the perfect time to make a horror game, and here's why. Let's start off with the reception of games that were made in the past 7 years, starting with Amnesia.
The shadow hunting me. I must hurry. My name is Daniel. I live in London.
Amnesia: The Dark Descent is an indie horror game by Frictional Games released back in 2010. This is quite a while ago, I know, but if anything, it at least helped develop the desire for horror that many gamers now have. And the reason why is simple. It was looked at as terrifying. With its well-crafted puzzles and enemy encounters, even though you couldn't defend yourself, it was a horror game that many people loved and probably helped get more interest in the genre overall. The game's estimated sales after only 2 years were at about 1.4 million copies. But 1.4 million for a game after multiple years isn't enough for modern AAA developers, where that amount isn't a rarity even after just a month. So let's look at a AAA developed horror title not too long after that. Resident Evil Revelations. A game that released in 2012 and developed by Capcom, Resident Evil Revelations was a Resident Evil title a little different from its main series. It was a little more in the vein of horror than what was usual at the time. The reception it received was also generally more positive, although a little mixed. With changes to an established franchise, however, this isn't unexpected. Overall, its reception was great, and it sold well on the 3DS, its original platform. However, with it releasing right before the PS4 and Xbox One were released, and only releasing on the PS3 and Xbox 360 soon after the 3DS version, its sales overall were probably a bit up and down. Still, there's little doubt that many people were looking for more horror and less action in this franchise. Even with horror having more positive reception overall, there was still little in the way of overall reported sales at that point. Although it's not always known what the sales are of many games, there didn't really seem to be a huge hit in this regard. But that all changed in 2013 with Outlast. A brand new horror IP by an indie developer that, although is experienced in the industry, wasn't well known to anyone until they made Outlast, their very first game. Although this team is made up of people familiar in the industry, overall it sounds like a recipe for disaster. An indie developer probably with a low budget in an industry filled with them, and their first game ends up being a horror game. Unlike Amnesia, however, this game was on multiple platforms, and even without being on the PS3 and 360, it still sold extremely well for a title that's not in an already established franchise. It sold over 4 million copies, and that number is crazy to hear about with any indie title. I think this is the first game that truly shows how much horror has grown as a genre in such a short amount of time.
We're putting that tongue to any use anyway. Truth be told, I was just tired of licking my own stance.
Then, in 2014, we received 2 titles that I would call true AAA horror titles. First up, Alien Isolation, with over 10 major awards won and over 2 million copies sold in the first year. It shows that you can make a good AAA horror title, and even with a beloved franchise from the 70s no less. The only issue I've seen is with its sales in comparison to the budget. Although it was back in 2015 and we still have no idea how much it's sold since then, Sega was apparently disappointed in how it sold when factoring in the cost of development. Even so, this was a game that was released late in the year where there was more competition, and even more competition than usual for horror because of this next game mentioned, The Evil Within. Although having more of a mixed reception than I personally expected, The Evil Within still got an overall positive reception and set records for its sales on release. Although I can't find any record on overall sales after the first month, it appears to have done well based off of what little I could find on the sales. If the titles have proven anything, it's that people are looking for new and interesting horror games. In 2014 at least, AAA developers were truly starting to see high sale counts for horror games, something that seemed to be so elusive only 10 years prior. Another title from 2014 was also a breakout success, but this time an indie title. Five Nights at Freddy's became hugely popular for one reason or another. Although the fan reception to the game was all over the place in general, there's no doubt that Five Nights became a gigantic indie success. Even YouTube videos just playing the game ended up in the tens of millions of views, while the sales, although unknown, were sure to have been more than anyone would have expected. The game also spawned many sequels, and the worst received one was most likely the RPG adaptation, or in other words, it wasn't horror, so people didn't care for it. All of that in 2014 alone, and I still haven't mentioned the arguably most important horror title of them all from that year. The Silent Hill franchise is one of the most respected series in all of horror, even if its latest few iterations weren't to the fans' liking. Quite possibly the strangest and most well-known interpretation of the franchise is the PT demo. Once a free demo that was hoped to have a fully fledged game, this is the title that, in my opinion, truly reinvigorated horror. Fans of horror or not, people quickly became interested in the absolute terror that this single demo would provide. The game that would have been made, Silent Hills, was sure to be a resounding success until Konami cancelled it. I'm not going to go over the details on its cancellation in this video, but the amount of outrage after the cancellation should prove that people weren't just excited for a good horror game, but they were practically starving for it, even if they didn't know it themselves. No one expected a horror title like this to exist. No one seemed to ask for it, but pretty much everyone appreciated it and wanted more. The next year had another horror game expected to release, Until Dawn. I don't think anyone was sure on how it would do. Most horror games are pretty different from Until Dawn's approach, which is about choosing your paths, and not necessarily a game about being there for the actual scares. It was more of a narrative and immersive horror than a game that attempted to be scary. I think it might be for this reason that Sony decided to mostly ignore Until Dawn and give it little attention. Even with all of this uncertainty, and the fact that it was a brand new IP and exclusive to one platform, it still sold very well, far exceeding sales expectations of the developer, and being well received by reviewers and fans alike. It also managed to be nominated for many awards and even win some as well. A game shrouded in uncertainty, ignored by Sony, and a new IP for a single platform still ended up succeeding as a horror title.
For the sake of my sisters.
After the immense success and popularity of Resident Evil 4, the developer Capcom made two sequels more in line with action than horror for its main series games. Although selling well, fans and even reviewers didn't appreciate the change in direction. So, they looked back to some of their old titles, got closer to their roots in horror, looked at other successful horror titles, and released Resident Evil 7 in 2017. Resident Evil 7 strived for horror in a way that we've never seen them go for, however. They changed a lot. The camera perspective went from third person to first person, and the levels became much more claustrophobic. With all of the changes made, some fans disliked this change. With the already established series, this is a completely different direction from the previous two main series entries, and still differed quite a bit from their older titles as well. But even with the worries and possible divide in fan base, the game sold very well, selling over 2.5 million copies in its first week, a number that actually reminds me a bit of the gigantic franchises that usually become the kings in terms of grossing. People now, more than ever, are seeing the experience that can be had from a good horror title, and want it. Not only that, but with lower sales of games like Titanfall 2, and disappointing releases like Mighty No. 9, Mirror's Edge Catalyst, Street Fighter V, Yooka-Laylee, and Mass Effect Andromeda, it makes me wonder, wouldn't it legitimately be a safer and better decision to make a low-cost horror game instead of a sequel? In my opinion, this is truly the perfect time to make a horror game.